Welcome to the Gabe Gligic Golf Show.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Gabe Gligic Golf Show. Today, guys, I have a heater for you, okay? If you've watched any of my YouTube videos over the past 2 years, you have heard one name and the word genius over and over and over, and that is my boy, Ryan Holley. Ryan Holley is a ground force expert and just one of the most impactful people I've ever had the luxury of having in my golf world. And I'm so excited to bring you this interview today because wait till you get into the mind of this guy and what he brings to your golf game and all of these things. I'm so excited. So anyway, without further ado, the ground force master himself, Ryan Holley.
Hey man, thank you, buddy. My ego is never as large as after I talk to you. Let me tell you.
You know what?
It's crazy. I appreciate it though, man.
Oh, dude, of course. Like you know what? So many of my big aha moments in the past couple years of doing this golf journey have come as a result of our sessions, and I think what you're doing, I think, is just so impactful to any golfer, depending on your level of seriousness. I think we all have this frustration level with golf. And I found that every time you and I do a session and you give me stuff to work on, I am infinitely less frustrated, infinitely more motivated. And then I just see progress in my game. And I think that's what we're all looking for. And especially in this world of golf where, you're always trying to find what are the best ROIs of things you can, are you spending money on gear? You're spending money on this, you're spending money. I think the best ROI I've ever gotten has been our sessions.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. That's great to hear. I mean, you do the work though, right? Like there's a lot of people out there looking for the quick fix and the really heavy ROI. Like, they want to go from a 15 to a 2 overnight. And you've done this, I mean, for a long time and putting a lot of work into it, right? Which is a reason that you're being successful. It's a reason you've gotten so much better. You've gotten hopefully some good information and, through Max and myself and your other kind of network. And then just kind of you go and apply it and you quote unquote, to quote Hogan, dig it out of the dirt,
Yeah.
Hopefully with better information where you're not wasting your time, but you are digging it out. You're going through trial and error and, you're doing it the right way for sure.
Well, and I think having the right information to go dig with is vital. And I think that's where you come in. And so quickly, let's just bring, for the people who don't know who you are and what you do. What I explain, you're a high level, you're like a high level cardiac surgeon for the golf swing, in a sense, right? Like, it's like you come in, we do a big x-ray and then we go, okay, here's where all the things are. But I'd like to hear from, in your words, kind of where you see yourself in the process and how you provide the value you do.
Yeah, for sure. So it depends on the player. I definitely do some coaching with some players, mostly some university or some high level AM players, players that don't need a lot of my time. Unfortunately, I just don't have a lot to give. Young family, pretty rigorous kind of travel schedule. But for the most part, because of the time commitment, I mostly act as a consultant, where I look at other coaches' players and I kind of give them some answers that they don't have the ability to get on their own. So whether that's using 3D, ground force, whatever the case is, I use tools that people just don't have the access to give information that they can't get elsewhere. I let them just go and work with their coach or on their own or however that relationship kind of works. But yeah, for the most part, it is just looking at the big part about obviously what we've done is looking at how you interact with the ground, how that creates movement in your body, and how you can swing the golf club more effectively based on that movement. Do we embrace the movement that a player has or do we slightly alter it? So for you, it was, some timing issues, some magnitude issues, like, making more of a good thing or potentially less of a bad thing. But the tools that we use, like the force plates that we use, allow us to just kind of say, hey, like, this is an objective look at your golf swing. This isn't opinion. This isn't a desire to coach toward preference. This is just what you do. And it's not just what you do, it's how you do it, right? So if you said, hey, like, I want to create more vertical force because it's a big link to club head speed, right? We know, okay, well, like, we can see exactly how much you put into the ground, where you put it in, and give you some drills to kind of change that pattern. and let you grow into the golf swing. There's some self-organization that takes place after those changes have been made, which is why it's not always just a magic wand moment. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's like boom, done, and just like that. And other times the player's got to make some subtle kind of unconscious change to allow the new change to kind of shine, right? And I think you've experienced both sides. I think you've seen it where it's like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't know that.
Yep.
And then on another time, and it was instantly like beneficial. And then other times it's like, man, that was really hard. But after, a couple of weeks or a month of training, I really got the idea. And that month or so typically is just your body trying to figure out, okay, what can I do from this new position? How do I return the golf club from this new spot? Right. And that's, so I try to introduce those things to players, and to your point about ROI is just shorten that journey, get a bigger ROI over a shorter amount of time. I think we've all been in that situation where we're taking golf lesson after golf lesson after golf lesson, and it's slow, and the process is really slow. And it doesn't mean it's bad information. My hope is using technologies to try to get to that place earlier. Right. And I think that's the role of tech in golf. I think there's a lot of golf coaches out there that can get you where you want to go. But does it fit the timeline that you want? And in today's world, I mean, everybody wants fast, right? Everything has to be on demand. And my hope is that, using those pieces of tech, that we can kind of expedite that process a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's where, my biggest aha moments were, I remember that first session that we did back in, this is 2021 with Max. Yeah. And so that's what's cool too, is that you work with the coach. Max and I kind of work on specific things, but then we talked about you actually on our podcast saying, you come in as a specialist to kind of be almost that objective third party that's part of the team and say,
for sure,
here's what's working, here's what's not working, here are the limitations. Great. And I think what was awesome about that first assessment, and what I think really gave me the aha moment with what you do, is that I think for those of us that haven't been exceptional golfers our whole life and we're trying to become that, we don't understand the value of how the full body works through the swing. I think, especially if we're kind of athletic people and we can kind of get away with some things, we can do a lot of top-down stuff, and our lower body gets really lazy. We're not really it is firing, but we don't know how it's firing. And I think that's where I got, where I was constantly kind of frustrated with, like, I'm an athletic person, but I'm clearly not doing this correctly. And I remember the first session we did where you just showed me pushing off where in my foot and when to load and where to push. And it was like, I felt like put me on the path of actually improving to where my ultimate goal is. I know my goal is different than most people, but that felt like I was kind of off the tracks. And now all of a sudden I felt like, okay, no. Now we're in a lane where we can start playing some real golf. And it's been exponential since there. And I think just learning that was massive value add from you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like, when you talk about the footwork and the ground up, I mean, the feet create our movement, and the way that our body moves dictates how the upper body has to behave. Right. So I see a lot of content online, obviously, whether YouTube, Instagram, wherever. And there's a lot of golf coaches talking about the top part of the golf swing, right? It's wrist angles, it's arms here, it's the club shaft needs to come through the body here. It's all this, shallowing obviously is a big in vogue kind of topic now. And that's all great. And it's not wrong. There's a lot of players that swing the golf club that way. But for me, at least, when I think, I try to think globally, right? So when we see coaches and they talk about, external rotation of the trail arm, or they talk about where the shaft needs to be, or, hey, the wrist needs to go into flexion, that's all correct. But those are very local thoughts. They're very singular. Okay, I need to do this. And I mean, a golf swing, you don't really have the time to do all those things. And that's why I think, like, golf lessons, typically people don't always get a lot better because they have to think about 3 or 4 different movements, sequential movements, in a really short amount of time. Where for me, like, the global thinking is like, okay, if I do this, how do the dominoes fall? The player's going to have to learn to do these things, right? So, it's how many things can I tick off that list with one motion? And my job, the way I look at it, is to find that one thing that does create all those other things that a player wants. Typically speaking, if a player doesn't say shallow the golf club as an example, yes, the wrist probably needs to flex. Yes, the trail arm probably needs to externally rotate and get a little bit more in line with the center of the body. But that's really just a byproduct of proper movement. And that proper movement starts at your feet because,
Right.
for me at least, the pelvis is kind of your key. If the pelvis moves in space and time, the upper body has to accommodate, right? So if the pelvis moves backwards, the chest is going to move down towards the ground. That's going to change what the club has to do coming down. So my job is to kind of find that perfect pelvic position for a player. And then your job as a player is like, okay, now how do I hit it from that position?
Right.
And sometimes it takes 10 swings and sometimes it takes, 10 weeks, but I've never really seen it take so long because people are pretty athletically inclined if you give them the opportunity. Now that being said, I don't work with like a lot of really poor athletes. So your beginning golfers who, are way over the top or, just completely not making what would be kind of a satisfactory motion. I think there's lots of coaches outside of me that can help those players for sure. But if the motion is pretty good and players are looking for that like kind of final piece or that thing to put it together, that's where I think the position of our lower half dictates everything else. And for most of us, the lower half is not where we need it to be to achieve the goals that we have.
Yes.
And that goes from, a player like yourself to, to the best players in the world, to your weekend warriors. The lower body and where that portion of our body is in space and time is just, it's vitally important.
And I think that was another big piece to me that, like, if you talk to anybody that knows me knows how now obsessed I am with the ground force stuff. And to the point where I'm so particular about the shoes I wear and so many of these things as a result, because I realized too, from doing our sessions and exactly what you're talking about, how it all starts from the ground. It's like your accuracy is in your feet. Your
Mm-hmm.
even when you and I did the ground force stuff with putting, and Ryan and I did a video where we tested if there was more than a 4% weight shift from back to front during the putting stroke, it changed the attack angle of the putter by a degree. And I would never have thought to be that aware of ground forces in something as simple as putting. And so now, and it makes that much of a difference on putting. I can only imagine when I'm trying to swing it 100 miles an hour,
For
how
sure.
much of a factor it's having. And I think too, I know some of this, maybe if you're not a high level golfer, this might sound maybe highbrow or too difficult. And I would push back and say, there's so many amateur golfers that I see at the range. And because now I'm aware of the stuff you've told me with ground force wise, something as simple as the amount of guys I see getting frustrated who, as they're going on their backswing, are leaking power on the outside of their foot, right? That as they're turning on their back right foot, and one of the first things you told me is you don't play defense in any sport on the outsides of your feet, right? If I'm going to play defense to you in basketball, I'm never going to be on the outside of my feet. And I see so many guys who, as they go on their backswing, they're turning to the outside of the foot. Now they're leaking outside their body. So now they're swelling up, and now they have to recenter, come back, and they're not athletically prepared to execute that motion. But then they get really frustrated when they dump it way right or hook it. And it was something as simple as that. And that's what you do. I'm like this is people aren't talking about this enough.
Yeah. To your point about the highbrow element of it, it's I do think that the information and the data that's collected is really high level stuff. But the job of any instructor is to take that and just make it palatable. Right. So the conversation that we're having, and sometimes I won't even use the terminology, or I won't even show players the graphs. It's hey, as an example, a player who has a lot of knee flex at impact. Typically speaking, I'm going to call it high 90% of the time. I never use the word always, just for the record, because everybody's anatomy behaves slightly differently. And sometimes, I'm not a biomechanist by trade. I didn't study this stuff. I just have a great network of people and the tools to kind of figure it out on over the last, 7 or 8 years. If a player has 2 knee flex, typically speaking, they haven't gotten their vertical force out of their system early enough. Now, that's a great conversation to have with other golf pros or golf nerds or data people. But when it comes to the application, it can be as simple as, hey, by the time you get to impact, I need to see your left leg straight or your lead leg straight, right? It doesn't have to be this really highbrow, difficult concept. It can be just, hey, like, let's just make sure this leg gets straight by the time we get to impact. And if it's really, really flexed, it's really bad, right? And then that player will typically chunk and thin. They'll miscontrol, or they won't control their low point. They'll have a problem creating speed and lift on the golf ball. And then all of a sudden, as that leg gets straight, they're going to hit some shots that are just like way further, way higher, way better. And it might take a little bit to grow into that move and to try to figure out how to put club on golf ball from this new position. But we know that position is long-term going to be more successful for that player. You're not going to see very many players with a lot of knee flex coming into the golf ball at impact.
And that's something that you and I,
amongst good players,
something you and I fix. So to kind of talk about your impact on me, when I first came to you with Max, the first thing we did was go through just straight up pressure shift and get a sense of, because where I was pushing on my foot was causing a problem. And then and that affected some hand pass stuff, which was kind of wild. So it was, and then also, I wasn't able to turn much. So we were trying to work with that, and I didn't have a ton of mobility. And so that was the start. But I remember, like, I workshopped that for like months to just to reteach my body how to push. Then once I kind of figured out how to push and that worked for that year, the next thing we did was exactly what you just said, was getting that left leg to fire and sequence correctly. And that's when last year, January, is when I started practicing kind of clearing that left leg. And if you kind of see me pre-January 2023, I'd never cleared the left leg with driver. I'd have a bit of a bent left leg. And now I full on jump.
And now it displaces pretty far back, and you start to roast it a little bit, right? And that's pretty like modern move right now, is where the left leg, or it's perceived as a kind of a modern move where the left foot kind of jumps back. But I'd encourage people to go back and look at videos of Tiger in 2000, and whether Tiger's the GOAT or not. I mean, that's for other people to debate. But in my opinion, nobody's ever played better golf than Tiger did in 2000. I mean, it's the best that I've ever seen anybody play golf. And his foot jumped back 2 or 3 inches every time he hit driver. It wasn't something that ever got talked about, but when we look at Tiger's swing driver, that thing was bouncing all over the place. And there's a reason why he was the longest of his peer group at the time. That's just, it's a modern fundamental, because we can measure it now and all this kind of different stuff. But I always tell people, it's not about the foot actually moving. It's about the force that gets created.
Right.
So if a player, I don't coach players to typically move their foot. I'll teach them to push in a certain direction. And if the foot moves, fine. And if it doesn't, that's okay, right? Like, my foot doesn't move too much. I have some ankle mobility issues that aren't really solvable at this point. So I can't push quite as hard as you do. So it's going to give me certainly a different look, right? And that's part of the process, is we have to know what our body can do and then what it should do. There's lots of players out there that should not be turning really like a tour player. Having that really open pelvic, open rib cage kind of look at impact. There's lots of players out there that's never going to work for. So then we can say, okay, well, like, if I can't do that, what can I do? And that's way more important, right? There's lots of successful players out there that do some pretty funky stuff, and most likely because they can't do the other stuff. So when we know, hey, this is what my body's capable of, this is what my outcome desire is for my golf ball. Now, how do we put those two things together? And where can we move the needle? If we can't move it everywhere, where can I move it?
Right.
And that's where the science and the data really becomes helpful. Because if I don't have that, I'm just straight up guessing. Like, I wouldn't know. Right.
And that's just, again, the lack of guessing, which is also really cool, is just it provides so much clarity for the student, because now I had a very clear directive of what to work on, and it actually made my range session so much better, because a lot of this stuff, I felt like my swing was in a good place, but then I almost feel like you chalk it up to, like, if you have some of these bad swings, you're like, oh, it's just the mental game. I think I think, and I'm kind of workshopping my stance on this, but I feel like the mental game almost gets too much credit now. And I think there are a lot of things technically that we're just not addressing. And as you start chipping away at those technical things, you actually get a lot more confidence. And, a simple thing like going back to the left knee flexion, extension, sorry. of cleaning up the low point. You know, the reason why you and I like moved to that is because I came to you and I said, okay, I'm chunking specifically my long irons quite a bit.
Yep. Yeah, your 4-iron was the one I think we worked with, right?
And I said, like, you know, I'm like, I've got all this speed, I've got all this strength, and I'm like, but my low point, I'm not hitting it nearly consistently, right? And this is part of the reason why if you guys see any of my range sessions, right? It's typically I'm working on 8 irons, and then I jump to 4 irons, and I bounce back between those two things. And a lot of the reason why I push the 4 iron is to work on that clean contact and that low point control. And I would say now, you know, I rarely chunk that. And if I do, I know why. It's because I haven't executed this properly. But I think from a mental game perspective, right? Knowing, because how many times do you get, you know, previously I would have been like, man, I suck. Can't hit a 4-iron. Like, you know, like it's almost like a hit and hope with some of those clubs when you don't know. And I what you provide also too, I think is just such an interesting piece of the mental game, because I'm so much easier on myself mentally now, because I go, oh, I just didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Right.
So now I just need to,
For sure.
like, this is what I need to work on and fix that. And again, I see so many guys at the range who are chunking it, and they get so frustrated because it's such a terrible feeling in your hands, right? Like,
oh yeah,
to chunk it or thin it, it's such a terrible thing. And I, you know, it's interesting too, because I practiced the other day and it was like -9 degrees, right? And so, you know, I'm defrosting the balls and I'm hitting them. And the amount of messages I get of people saying like, oh man, I like, don't thin it or whatever. And like, not to sound like any sense of arrogance, like I didn't thin any, right? I didn't hit any fat that hurt. Like, my hands didn't hurt. And a lot of that is from spending the last year just drilling this left leg move where, you know, I probably, my hands would have hurt a couple times during that range session in years prior, but now it was not nearly the same experience.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. When the body's in the right position, the club ends up being in the right position. When the body's in a poor position, you have to do more work to get the club into the right position. You know, and that's where people like they'll come to me and they'll say, "Hey, I got this swing flaw. I slide too much. I'm over the top. I flip it. I cast it. I release the club too early. I early extend, whatever it is." And typically speaking, those things are helping that player, right? Like, every scooper that I've ever met, they scoop because their lower half has moved too far forward and hasn't cleared or gone up. It hasn't braced itself into impact. So then they keep sliding through impact, and they have to let the club head catch up to the golf ball. So they scoop it. And that's helping them. It's their only squaring mechanism. It's the only thing that they can do. So if they kept their body position the same and put the club exactly where it would be perfect, they would hit it, you know, as a right-handed player, they'd hit 100 yards right, or they'd hit it right off the hosel. So in reality, that scooping motion is actually helping them. So I'm like, you don't have a swing flaw. The scoop is not the thing we need to fix here.
Right.
That's the symptom. The symptom is the scoop. The root cause is the fact that your body's way over here. And you'd be amazed that if I get the lower body into the right position, that player is not going to scoop the golf ball, because now that would hurt them.
Right.
So you take it from this really beneficial relationship and that's why golf lessons are really hard sometimes, because it's like, well, I know what to expect with my scoop. Right. I know where kind of is going to go. I'm not always happy with the result, but there's a small window of expectations. Like, it's going to do one of these three things. However, when you get the body into the right spot, now all of a sudden that range of outcomes grows a little bit in the short term.
Yep.
But if that body can say, okay, I'm never going to go past this point. I know how to brace myself. I know how to get my body into this position. You know, it doesn't take long for the hands and the arms to be like, oh, I just don't need that anymore because I'm going to hit it bad. And now let's figure out how to hit it well.
Right.
But trying to get the club into the right spot with the slide still in place is just going to hit it bad. So it's this like inverse relationship. You really do need to change the body before you change the upper half, right? Like, so one of the most popular training aids out on the market right now is the Pro Center, right? I think a lot of your audience would have seen this, and I mean, it's a great training aid. However, I get a lot of, like, you know, weekend warriors or recreational players who come in and say, like, I have it. I spent a fortune on it because of shipping from the US. It doesn't work well. I'm like, no. It works just fine. But, you know, like I said, to that sliding idea is, if I kept that Pro Center on my trail hand and slid, I would literally hit it. I would shank it into my wall in my studio. Right. So that Pro Center is fine, but with the body's movement, it doesn't work. You never maintain it and hit it well. But if all of a sudden that body's in the right position, all of a sudden that pro center is gold.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing. That's with any training aid out there. Anything that's training the top half of your body, we have to understand why that swing fault occurs. And I'm going to say like 90% of the time, it's going to be something you're doing with your lower half. And the nice thing is that lower half is directed by your feet.
And so what?
So then it's like, okay, well, all we have to do is fix like what's going wrong in your feet. And then all of a sudden the pelvis will be in a better position. The legs will be in a better position, which means the club can actually do what we want it to do, whether it's shallowing, steepening, more wrist flexion, less wrist flexion, more like less scooping, more scooping. I've got players who lean the handle way too far forward and they don't get it airborne. Well, that's just as big a problem as scooping it. So all of these things, right, are just symptoms of poor body mechanics. And unfortunately, everything that I see on YouTube and Instagram is typically talking about the upper half. What do we do with the golf club? And, when you free a player up to just say, hey, you have 0.2 of a second from top of backswing to impact, and I need you to do this one thing, and that's it. That's a freeing thought for a lot of players. And then that upper body kind of organizes around that thought, and we start to see better results, as opposed to saying, hey, you have 0.2 of a second to, externally rotate your trail arm, add some wrist flexion, shallow the golf club, make sure you stay behind it, all this other stuff. Like, no, let's just do this one move with our foot and see what happens. And that, typically speaking, is a lot easier for players to digest.
And that's why, I probably sound like a bit of a broken record sometimes to people, or whatever. It's like, this is why I constantly try and bring your name up as much as possible. And why I feel like the ground force stuff, it's just not talked about enough, because it's so interesting how your body will just find a way to hit the ball, right? Talking about the scooping and all these it'll make these compensations. Like, it's actually incredible how your body will just find a way to make contact in some capacity. It may not be good contact,
100%,
but it'll find a way to make contact. And so then,
the one thing that your body will always try to accommodate for you or try to create for you is hit the golf ball at your target. The best way it knows how. So you put your body somewhere in space and time, you're going to figure out kind of how to get it. The better the athlete, probably the better the solution. The worse the athlete, probably the worse of the solutions. Right. But typically speaking, all that stuff is just derived from, hey, I'm not in the right spot.
And that's where I go, when I see a lot of this golf coaching stuff and I see people getting frustrated, and I go like, why do you think the ground force stuff just isn't talked about more? Just because I have sent numerous people to you, and both Max and I have said, like, if you don't see Ryan, it's a life bogey. Like, you're like, if you play any amount of golf, I'd say if you're somebody that plays more than 10 rounds a year, like, it is worth seeing you, and
just what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Just so you can get a quick understanding of, like, just get the whole body to understand an emotion that works for you. Why do you think that the ground force stuff is not necessarily as in vogue as I think it should be?
Yeah, I think that comes down mostly to just cost. The ability to measure is prohibitively expensive. And you always do need to measure this stuff. So there are visual clues that will tell you kind of how a player moves. I try to, because I coach coaches into, using ground information in their everyday lessons, whether they can measure or not. I do look for the cues, the visual cues. So when I see a player, I try to look at that golf swing in slow-mo, and I try to kind of guess at what I'm going to see on the graph. Am I going to see mistimed verticals? Am I going to see misplaced pressure sequences? Like, am I going to see too much, horizontal force? What am I going to see? And I try to guess. And I would say, with all the swings I see, I guess at probably a 60% accuracy rate, where like 60% of the time I'm like, oh, okay, it's kind of what I expected, which means about half the time I've got it wrong by guessing.
And for clarity, guys, like when you see Ryan analyze the data, it is quite in depth, quite thorough, and like it's unreal to watch you go through the graph. So it's wild that for the amount of data you look at, launch conditions, like, I can show you any quad data and you can go, oh, that was this. And so for you, the eye, so the eye test just doesn't cut it. for even someone at your caliber.
Yeah. And that's why, like, I don't really work with remote players. I work with players remotely once they have been on plates. So
Right.
I work with a guy in LA who has a swing cat at his house. It's great. That's awesome. I can definitely do my job from the comfort of my home. For players who reach out on Instagram or YouTube or whatever and want to get an opinion, I'm like, that's all you're going to get is an opinion. I wouldn't know.
Right.
I could take a guess and it'll be a decently educated guess, but I'm not comfortable at a 60% accuracy rate to charge people money for that.
Right.
When it comes to being in studio though, and we see 100%, like we see the data 100%, it's like, yeah, okay, now we can make some objective decisions. We can form some opinions and we can move forward. But I do try to guess, and it's really difficult. So, it is the kind of thing that needs to get measured. And I do think that that's where the problem is even the most inexpensive systems out there are going to run in the $20,000 range.
Right.
And they're going to be limited in scope.
So let's talk about your studio and your setup and your rig that you use, because I think that's a good thing to kind of highlight of how this data gets captured and how this all goes down. So you got the, are you still the only dual, you were like one of the 2 or 3 that only had dual force plates in Canada when we started working together.
I think it's still 3. I know that there's been some clubs looking at adding them into their instruction offering. As far as I know, it's 3. It might be up to 5. I'm not sure. There's 2 of us in British Columbia, actually about 45 minutes apart from each other. So BC definitely has the most concentrated concentration of us.
Lucky for me.
But yeah, so I use 2 force plates, one under each foot, and then there's 2 pressure plates on top of those plates. So for the longest time, pressure and force data was collected as a basically average of what the right foot and left foot did. So it was a net result, right? So imagine the graph shows us net wise that we're doing 0%. Okay. Well, it could be that my left foot was pushing 10% that way and my right foot was pushing 10% that way. So I netted out to 0. It could be that neither foot was doing anything. It could be 0 and 0.
Right.
Could be 20 and 20. Right. So when we look at individual or like a single plate, we see a net result. And that net result just isn't in depth enough from my perspective. So when we take a look at that, I can know, okay, what does the right foot do? What does the left foot do? What does that net us out to? The timing of those forces. Hey, is this too early? Is this too late? A thing that I think a lot of players struggle with is early extension, right?
Yep.
And if you imagine Scotty Scheffler, right, his right foot kind of pulls back way away from the target line. He kind of scrapes it along the ground, essentially. The timing of that move, and then subsequently the opposite direction for the left foot. So the left foot pushing kind of towards the target line and the right foot pushing away from target line. The timing of that is what causes early extension, right? So there's a lot of info out there about early extension being weak hammies, weak glutes, so on and so forth. And I will push back against that all day. When I lived in Toronto, I had the opportunity to work with some Toronto Maple Leafs. So in the era of like Phil Kessel, Dion Phaneuf, like that era of Leafs. And one of the things was both those guys that I mentioned had early extension principles. And, TPI will tell us that, and I love TPI, so this isn't throwing too much shade at them, but they will tell us that that's weak hammies and weak glutes. And if you look at Dion and you look at Phil and they have asses like dump trucks, you can't tell me that they have weak hammies and weak glutes, man. They spend their whole day exercising those muscles right on the ice. So I'm like, but both suffer from early extension. So now weak hammies and weak glutes can definitely contribute to how much you can push in the directions I just described. But it certainly doesn't mean that you're absolutely going to have early extension, right? Or that you if you do have weak hammies and weak glutes, we can't time that from a better perspective. So the timing of that force is what causes early extension. So I see a lot of people, working out in the gym and doing this, and then they still process movement the same way. So they might be stronger, they might be more stable, they might be more flexible, but that neurological link between their feet and their brain, that thing still doesn't have the right context. So you're still always going to early extend if you don't change the timing. And if you don't know where the timing is, then you can't fix it. Right. And that's a huge one for me. And that's one of the keys to the dual force plates is that we can look at, okay, how much does the right foot do? And if the right foot isn't doing an excessive amount, then almost everybody is strong enough to push back with their left foot. However, sometimes that player is doing so much with their right foot that we just have to tone it down, and then the left foot is fine. Other times it's the complete inverse. So it's like, okay, I need to do more with my left foot to accommodate what my right does.
Right.
So we need that information to really solve the problem. We need to know what both feet do at any one point in the golf swing, because that the footwork will change my pelvis's positioning. And as soon as I change my pelvic position, the upper body has to adapt. Has to. If I push the left side of my pelvis 2 inches, away from the target line, and 2 inches higher than it was at setup, then my upper body will have to change its location to hit the golf ball solidly. It has to. There's no other way to phrase that, right?
Right.
So then it's like, okay, well, is that a benefit to a player? And depends on what we're looking for. Depends on what we're trying to construct. Are we trying to construct a swing that's going to hit the golf ball at target? Are we trying to construct one to hit it as far as possible? Like what's the goal? And then we know, okay, well, this is probably where we need to shade towards, right?
Wild. And that was, and that's something, having the dual plates for me, when coming off the summer of Shanks in 2021, as Max and I were trying to get rid of some of that early extension stuff. And that basically actually rid it for me, like figuring out,
right.
And it's interesting. Like I'm probably one of the people that talks about why bad hip mobility, glute strength, and all that is a contributing factor. But it's true. I did have the luxury of working on that strength and fixing that, plus you. Right.
Right. So you were fixing and working that strength for a reason that we had already identified.
Right.
Right. Just going to the gym and strengthening your posterior chain is not necessarily going to take away your early extension. It will help if the information that you're getting in order to fix it is solid. Right. So there's this relationship that we see all the time, where if a player steepens the shaft in transition, they typically stand up. So a lot of coaches out there will try to change the pitch of the shaft, where I'm like, whoa, let's reverse that. Let's change what the feet do. Let's put that pelvis in a position where steepening the shaft will not allow the player to hit the golf ball. Because again, if that number one instruction that our brain is going to listen to is hit the golf ball at my target, hit the ground here, or whatever, like hit the golf ball solidly. If I change that position, there's no way a player can come in steep. So then it's like, okay, well, let's dial in the pelvis in this direction, and this is how we do it. And then let's set up an environment for that player to make sure that they know exactly where that club was. So, my favorite one, if a player kind of comes over the top or gets steep, is a noodle or an alignment stick kind of at a 30-degree angle covering the golf ball. It's like, okay, so here's how your pelvis needs to move, and now I need you to swing underneath this noodle or underneath this alignment stick. Now, it's one thing for a player to try to swing under that alignment stick, still early extending, and they can do it big time. And they can hit massive draws and, kind of achieve the environment goal. But all of a sudden, if I put that pelvis in a different position through the footwork and then put them in that environment, man, we start to see some really different stuff.
Right.
So the right movement, the right environment to practice from, and time, and man, like, you got a winning recipe.
Yeah, I see that in myself. I think I'm 2 years out from working on your stuff, and I feel like this is the best my swing's ever looked as a result. And also scoring wise, like it's like the fruition of all those things. So now how that ties into back to your studio. So you have the dual force plates synced up with Foresight GC Quad, and then you have
with GC Quad,
and then you have cameras all around, so that you can see all the positions. And this was also really cool. And I thought this was like really just interesting, was seeing how the different forces, like a big thing for me, I was not steep enough, or my attack angle wasn't good enough on my irons to hit responsible pro shots, basically, is how you and Max kind of phrased it. Like, especially if you want to hit a draw with your irons, to hit a responsible draw, you got to be like 4 down,
Yep.
And I remember you, like, it's what's really cool about this whole setup was that in combination with the different plates and making adjustments to your body and saying, okay, we're going to push from here, get the hands here, and I want you to feel this, and we're going to see this attack angle go exactly where we want, and you're going to hit that nice smooth draw or smooth fade, whatever the shot shape is. And that's what's really cool about having all the data together, is you get the 3 different forces which are horizontal torque and vertical, in combo with the quad data and how all that meshes together. And I think that's where it's also cool to watch you work, because you go, very quickly within, actually our sessions were never long. It was like, here's what you're doing. And within like a couple minutes, it's like, here's where we're moving to. And you could already see a tangible difference having all that data synced up.
Right, because the outcome data, so the launch monitor data is the king, right? It's how, what we need that golf ball to do differently. So at no point would I ever change a golf swing unless I had a clear idea of what the outcome difference needed to be. So with recreational players, I trust them to tell me what they will do, because I don't have the ability and the luxury to go see them on golf course play. So I need to trust them. With higher level players that track all of their stats, pretty easy, right? If your left rough tendency is at 20% and your right rough tendency is at 5%, well, we probably need to hit less balls to the left. And that's a pretty simple idea. So then you couple all of this launch monitor data, and then you get some 3D data, and you're like, okay, well, so this is where the body is. This is how it's affecting the golf club. And then the force production data, the ground data, is how that body moved to where it got to, right? We don't just move our body through space and time willy-nilly. The feet move our body. So it's like, okay, well, in 3D, I see too much slide through impact. Well, then all of a sudden, I just need to look at the things that are contributing to stopping a slide. It's like, oh, okay, well, like that's either going to be braking force, it's going to be vertical, or it's going to be pressure not enough forward. And it's like, okay, well, one of those three things I'm going to look for in the data, and then I'm going to say, okay, well, like that's exactly what it is. And then it's really quickly on to, hey, this is how we, in your case, I think we did some braking force with the left foot. And it's like, okay, this is how we brake, this is how we push, this is when we push. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. And because you're a good athlete, you can do that. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Ball went way higher. I hit it clean, and attack angle went exactly where I needed to do. Cool. And then it's a matter of, hey, do you have the patience and the time to go ahead and ingrain this and make it automatic? And if you do, you'll be well on your way. If you don't, then it's just going to take you a longer time, right? The analogy I always use is, with really great players, my job is to set a roadmap. It's like, okay, here's A, this is where we're starting, this is where we want to get to. So B, how far you have to go and how fast your car drives dictates how long it will take. So a lot of like the professionals that I work with, or really high level AMs that I work with, they drive basically Ferraris. They're going to get to their destination really, really fast if the route is good.
Mm-hmm.
Other players who don't take care of their body, never practice, go to the golf course once a week. It's like, in that case, you're kind of driving the equivalent of like a 1974 Civic or something, right? Like some beat up old car. It's like, yeah, it doesn't mean that the math or the route is wrong. It just means it's going to take you a little bit longer to get there.
Right.
Right. And that's where patience need to kick in for a player, and really understanding what improvement takes. A lot of us say we want to improve and then don't really do anything.
Yeah.
And that goes with life, golf, fitness,
yep.
blah, 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 whatever. Right. We have a tendency to complain and lament, but we don't really ever kind of try to solve it. And when we do try to solve it, we go and we repeat the same mistakes and pitfalls that we've always made, or that all of our friends always make, right? What we want to do is we want to find golfers who are really good in this case and see what they do. And we want to say, okay, well, like, if it's good enough for Gabe and he says it's powerful stuff, it's like, okay, well, like we should probably give that a try. We probably shouldn't just go to our local pro who is out there teaching with a tennis racket. No offense to anybody out there doing that. Because sometimes that's the right recipe. But maybe we need more. And maybe we need to stop repeating the same mistakes that we've made kind of forever, right? We need to take a different approach to it. And that tends to be where I think a lot of players have success. No reinventing the wheel. I mean, all the stuff that I talk about is stuff that, is out there. It's how we derive those positions, how we derive those numbers, how we kind of get to where we're going. And I think that's the difference in kind of what I provide for people, is just looking at it a little differently.
Yeah. And that's why I can't, like I said, I can't scream your name from the rooftops more. Because if you are somebody who is, I've realized I am a psycho, and I crave this kind of information and this kind of stuff. Cause what makes you make my life easier, because I just know exactly what I need to do. It's not,
For sure.
I never, Like, and I think that's what's been really great for me over the past year specifically was as I started to really fine tune the swing and get rid of a lot of the crap that I had kind of built up through poor habits, poor mobility habits and things like that. My practice and building in the right things, I know exactly what I'm going to the range to do every single day. And
Well, that's
having that
key, right?
blueprint.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and not to like date myself, but well, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will remember a band called the White Stripes, right? So this is an analogy I
Yeah.
always use, where like the White Stripes, not my favorite band in the world, but they're fine. They made a lot of hits using a guitar and drums, right?
Yeah.
They were a massive band selling out like arenas, iconic songs, right? Like Seven Nation Army and all this other stuff. And they did it with guitar and drums. They had this very small box that they operated from. The problem in the golf world right now is the box that we operate from is massive. There's every time you scroll through your Instagram account, you're going to see somebody talking about something about the golf swing. Every time you go on YouTube, and it's this infinite amount of information that we get to draw from. And that does not help in any walk of life. Constant information, infinity options, or infinite options, that doesn't help us, right? What we want to do is we want to take and say, okay, if my golf swing isn't working the way that I want it to, it's one of these 2 or 3 things. And I'm going to spend all of my time getting really good at these 2 or 3 things. I'm not going to go and scroll YouTube and go scroll Instagram and look for all this different stuff. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust the person who's giving me the information, right? And that's where I think, like, you know, a lot of the players that I work with, they've had a lot of success recently because it's simplified the process. They don't have to look for answers. It's like, oh, I already know the answer to that. I just have to get better at doing it.
Right. And speaking of
Right.
having players having success recently, I'd like to jump into probably the biggest Canadian success of 2023, and that was Nick Taylor's win at the Canadian Open. And you played a role on his team. Kind of, he brought you into the fold. Was it late 2022 or 2023 when you jumped in
It
working with
was
him?
September 2022. We started our relationship where he was trying to fight one specific shot. You know, he told me he hit this one. It was a pull hook, trying to hit a fade and hit a pull hook, and he told me he thought it cost him a couple $100,000 a year, and nobody could kind of fix it for him. And you know, through the numbers and stuff, I think it cost him a lot more than a couple $100,000 over the course of a year.
Right.
And you know, Nick has a great team. He's got a coach that works with him out on the road. That's a set of eyes. Doesn't really talk golf swing. Just more of like a coaching kind of, like I said, that second set of eyes. He's got a great caddy in Dave. His short game coach is awesome, like Gareth. Great Chris, his mental coach. Great team around him. But you know what Nick talks about all the time and through interviews and stuff is that since we started working together, the path is really clear. And that I take a lot of pride in, that, you know, he doesn't have to go look for answers. When we talk a few times a week, all when he's out on the road, and it really is just, how does this look? How does this look? How does this look? We're not trying to solve riddles. He's a really great player.
Yeah.
And if he does a few specific things well, and then he makes a couple of putts, his week is probably going to be really good, right? So like my favorite story from that Canadian Open was we had seen each other the Friday before he left for Toronto, and he was hitting it great. And we had a whole conversation about how he was ready to win. And, you know, he had that great showing at the Waste Management in February. And we both knew that he was hitting it as good as he's probably ever hit it in his life. And that he was ready to win. And I went off to Edmonton to work, and he went off to Toronto. And on Thursday, he shot 75. And we were texting on Thursday night, I guess, as he was getting now famously yelled at by his wife. We were chatting on Thursday night. And I was like, man, like, what happened? Like, how in the world did you shoot 75? I'm like, swing looks good on video. And he's like, it's like, honestly, I just made a couple messes. If a couple putts go in, we're going to be in good shape. Now, I didn't expect him to go out and win the golf tournament after opening with 75, but he went on, I think he was like 21 under over his last 54 or something like that.
Crushed it.
And then had one of the most iconic moments in Canadian sports history, making that huge putt, which I wish I could take credit for, but we never talk putting. So that's all him and Gareth and Dave. So
That's incredible, man. Well, and I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the effect of what you do on the mental game. And so it's really cool to see that even at someone at Nick's level, who is, in British Columbia where we are, has been a local legend since he was a kid. Like, everyone knows him.
Yeah.
But now he's cemented himself as one of the greatest Canadian golfers ever. And so he's got the pedigree, clearly a great player. And what's wild is how much mental freedom what you do gives him, right? Someone at that level who's got a million reps under his belt, who's seen, every type of hole, every type of shot, he's been around the block, and just adding in this piece, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know now versus I'm going and trying to solve a problem that I have no idea what the roadmap is to fix.
Right. And that's key, right? Is having that information. So like, and Nick's even guilty of it now. It's like, he'll want to like tweak something and he'll still think about it as, okay, this is where the club needs to go. But when I talk to him, I'm like, no, this is where, like, say, as an example, his takeaway tends to get a little bit too far inside, especially for a guy who wants it to fade more often off the tee. And he'll still think about kind of where the club head needs to go. And I'm like, no, we need to identify the part of the body that's allowing that club to go inside. Because it's really hard under the gun to think about where the takeaway is going. It's really easy to ingrain a specific, in this case, it's a head movement thing for him. So his head moves a little too early, rotationally. It gets the club a little bit too far inside. So for me, it's all about how do we get that head to stabilize for the first 1 foot of the golf swing. And when he does, golf swing gets more on plane, gets way better, stops hitting hooks. But even for him, he's still in that mode through 30 whatever years of playing golf of trying to get the club to somewhere. And so, of course, I have to come in and shut that down and say, no, we don't put the club places, we put our body places. And the club will just go where we want it to go. If we move properly, I promise you that club will go where you want it to do. And having that internal cue that really, really close to our body, right? It's much easier to control the body than it is something that's floating and moving at high speed away from us. And if I can get that object at high speed to move where I want it to, just by concentrating on that internal cue, we get a lot more success.
Incredible, man. Well, again, congrats to you. It's what's cool is I've just seeing kind of your growth and seeing that validated at that level was also cool for me, just because, again, I tell everybody, I'm like, guys, this is life bogey. Go see Ryan. Go see Ryan. And so it's like, listen, if it can contribute at that level, it just further validates that, like, there's something here in the sauce. So that's really, really cool. And again, super pumped for you guys on getting that win. So now moving forward to kind of 2024, you're a Ping staffer now. You've jumped on board with them and are kind of repping their product, and like, Ping is my bag's basically 90% Ping. So I'm with you. What made you kind of jump to them and kind of become a staff guy?
Yeah, so they approached me, and I had some conversations with some other club companies. And for me, it's a relationship that I think is important, but one that doesn't. I mean, you're never going to get rich repping a brand, right? So the brand is something that you have to kind of believe in. And when it came right down to it, I don't need new golf clubs. I don't need any of the stuff that comes along with it. What I like to do, though, I would have. Ping was my number one choice, and it simply is because of the way that they create and build golf clubs. So, not to get too into the weeds with this, but most golf clubs are manufactured in China. If they say made in the USA, it's because they get assembled in the USA. Most things are made in China. Most golf companies are publicly traded companies, which means they have a financial responsibility to make things as cheap as possible, basically to create that wealth for their investors or for their stock owners. And Ping being a privately held company, a family business, when you get a club from Ping, you get a tag on that golf club. You have seen these where, like, everybody who handled your golf club has initialed their work. And when I worked, when I had a business in Toronto, we offered a service where we would take a stock golf club and we would take it apart. And if a player, didn't want to spend the $400 on an upgraded shaft, and that's, overkill for a lot of players, right? Yep. And they wanted just the best stock offering, we had a service where we would disassemble the golf club, weigh the components, make sure everything was what the manufacturer said it was, and then reassemble it as it was built. And what we found was certain companies, and Ping was at the top of the list, were always, or like in the high 90% bang on when a club was spec'd out what it was at the factory. If it was an extra stiff shaft and 10 degrees aloft, man, that golf club was an extra stiff and 10 degrees aloft. Some club companies, and I'm not going to name names because I still like a lot of people that work at those companies, when we would get an extra stiff, it would cycle out, its frequency would be at a regular.
Right.
Now, that's not a perfect measurement for sure. There's issues with frequency of shafts, but it's not even close.
Yeah.
Right. And Ping was always like right in the neighborhood or like spot on as what it should be. So if you're going to buy a golf club from a manufacturer, like there's great fitters, like obviously we're in the Genuine Hat. I'm good friends with those guys over there. I send a lot of people their way because they do stuff the right way. They're going to build you a golf club that is exactly what you want, but that comes with a cost.
Yep.
So if you're going to buy a golf club from a golf town or from like an off the rack or fit and built through a manufacturer, I cannot recommend highly enough that it's a Ping golf club. Not only will Ping kind of stand behind their work and replace things that don't work, you're going to get what you pay for. There's no point in spending $1,000 on a new driver and ordering a stiff shaft and having it show up as a senior and you never know. And you're like, man, I cannot hit this thing to save my life. We've all been there, right? Get a driver great in a fitting, get it from a manufacturer, and it's like, this feels like junk. I hate this golf club. And that just is something you can avoid by buying something that's properly built and spec'd out. So that's kind of the long and short with Ping is like they do it the right way, man, and they do a great job of it. And it's a name it's a brand that I'm happy to like kind of stand behind. There's other companies out there. I'm like, yeah, you make good golf clubs. I'll take some free stuff. Great, but if I'm going to go out and wear the gear and talk about their company, I want it to be something that fits the data side, fits my kind of like my idea of like what success looks like. And that golf club being what you order, and spending $15 or $2,000 on a set of irons, man, you probably want it to be what you got. Yep. Right? You don't want to go buy a car and they tell you it's a V8 and it's like, oh, under there it's actually only a V4. Well, unless I'm a mechanic, I might not know that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, man, this car does not drive very well. Well, no shit, it's a V4.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. Well,
I'm seeing that firsthand. I ordered a full set of I-230s plus the Glide wedges. And I had them built direct from the factory. And it's been probably the best set of clubs I've ever owned.
Right.
Like,
yeah. And that, I think that's just I think it's so important. Like, everybody's in a different financial spot. So if you're going to order golf clubs and you're going to try to save the money, which I think, especially in today's climate, it's really important.
Oh yeah.
Everything's expensive now. Going with a brand like Ping where it's like, hey, it's even where everybody else is price point wise, but I know I'm going to get what I ordered. I can't say enough about that because I know through experience, I know how off things can get. And there's certain clubs and certain manufacturers that I would never, ever order a club through unless it was being built by a professional like the guys at Genuine or TXG right. or Modern Golf or any of these other really kind of high quality fit and build places. And that's going to come at a price, right? And like everything does, if I can't afford it, I would always tell people to go and do the fitting and buy the proper shaft and have a club professional build it. But not everybody's going to be able to spend, $1,500, $2,000 on a driver. No. It's just the reality of everybody's situation right now. So if you're going to spend the money, the $800 on a driver, or the $650 on a driver, whatever drivers cost nowadays, you want to get what you're going to get, and that's where the privately held companies are going to do a better job of giving you what you bought.
Yeah. No, I'm living that right now. Like I said, I got fit at Ping HQ in Toronto by one of their guys, and everything showed up perfect. I've had zero tinkering with the stuff I ordered. Yeah. So I'm thoroughly pleased with that. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Swing weights, lies, all that stuff will be exactly what you wanted. The shaft will be quality, and the build process will be great. And if you've ever, I'd encourage anybody who can get down there, but going to see the Ping facility, man, it's so cool. it really is like a family business. It's neat to see the guy who's been bending golf clubs there has been bending golf clubs there for like 20 years.
I love that.
It's pretty neat.
I love that.
Yeah, it's neat.
One quick thing before we wrap up is what's got you excited about 2024 in your world? Any new discoveries? Any new rabbit holes you're going down? Anything that any evolutions in your work that you're pumped about or seeing, or trends, and any of those things?
Yeah, I think I think there's a few. I think the introduction of 3D into the software that I use has been coming. It's been on the brink for a couple of years. I believe it will be here this year, which will be really cool to be able to have everything in one spot to look at. I'm going to learn more about that next week at the PGA show. There's some cool stuff happening down there. Down in Orlando, and then it's a matter of, I think the rollback is a really interesting proposition. I think I think it's going to change the way that people want to swing the golf club. I think it's going to change the way that people have to swing the golf club. That's fair. Really exciting to have an eye towards that. The rollback discussion, I mean, I think it's great for the game. I think it's great for recreational players. I think it's great for the average player. Some people don't think it's great for recreation and they're in favor of bifurcation. I would tell people that, if you take golf seriously, you probably already rolled back your own golf ball. Most people out there are playing like a premium or just sub-premium golf ball. Call it the Titleist Pro V or the AVX, kind of in that family. That ball does not go as far as like Top Flights and Dunlops and all these other kind of lower end distance-oriented golf balls.
Right.
So at playing those golf balls, we've already rolled back the distance. I don't think that players will really notice or really care too much about the loss of 4 or 5 yards here or there. I think it'll be better for the professional game having players be grouped up closer, because it'll start to put better or more onus on other parts of the game other than just pure distance. And I think the unintended consequence for the USGA is that scoring will go down. I do not think scoring will go up as the golf ball gets shorter. I think it will go down, because if you give a tour player who's been chasing speed, and again, I don't think tour players right now are chasing speed. I think that there's some really strong correlations that show that players, once you've gotten into like an acceptable distance range, you don't need more. But if players are chasing distance and say they're investing 7 or 8 hours a week in the gym, in just training with like stack or super speed, and they're doing all of these activities that account to time, they don't have to do that anymore. Now, what are they going to fill their 7 or 8 hours with? They're going to fill it with short game practice, with putting, with iron play. They're going to dial in their approach game a whole lot more. They're also going to play a golf ball that probably spins a little bit more to keep the distance down, which is going to stop quicker on firmer greens.
Right.
So now all of a sudden the iron and approach game delivery improves. The golf ball suits that side of it more. Cool. Like you're just going to get players who that proximity with, say, a pitching wedge. That proximity, whatever it is with a pitching wedge, call it 25 feet on average. You're going to see that with 7 iron.
Right.
Like it won't have any, in my opinion, at least, anyway, I guess we'll see in a few years, it won't have any effect on scoring. I think it'll have an inverse relationship, which will be interesting to see. But we'll see. But I think recreational players are already rolling back their own golf ball.
Right.
I don't think players will really notice much of a difference. Because I mean, really, at the end of the day, that AVX is probably going to go just as far as the current Pro V, and you probably wouldn't notice any change at all. Right. The new Pro V will probably spin a little bit less, go a little bit shorter, and maybe players will play it just because tour validation. But, maybe we'll see players going down a grade in their golf ball just to make up that difference. We'll see.
What do you think that's going to? What do you think it's going to do to driver numbers, like a driver attack angle, things like that? You think like it's going to change the driver swing?
Don't know yet. I think I don't know with the current golf ball. I know that the switch from like a Bellata or like a softer golf ball has definitely modernized the golf swing. We don't do the same activities that we used to, whether it's the way that our body interacts or the way that our wrists load and behave. We don't do what we used to. But again, I don't know what that golf ball is going to do. My guess is there's going to be players that figure out how to maximize that carry distance at a lower ball flight so it rolls further. And there's going to be players who figure out how to maximize it at a higher ball flight and stop it quicker. Because if you can fly at 310 and just die it, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you hit it 310 and it chases out 20 yards, okay, well, like, cool, like that's fine too. So I guess it all just depends on how they create the golf ball. Something will change in the desired delivery of the golf swing. I just won't know what it is yet until I kind of see that golf ball. But I don't think it's going to have. I think it'll have an effect where there'll be more players in contention week in, week out. I think it'll help a lot of players that are getting lapped by distance. And again, you can say, hey, that's okay, and we'd prefer to have a distance game. But for me, if I'm watching any sport, I'm actually after the competition and the closeness and the that kind of side of things. If every ball left Fenway Park, I don't think anybody would watch baseball, right? And if you put an aluminum bat in every player's hands, it doesn't matter who it is, they're going to hit it out of the park, right? The ball speed would go way too high, and it would just not be a very fun game. And I think to some degree, that's the argument in golf, is like, it's just not that much fun, because, you know, we see these players hitting it so far, but then like they don't even make birdies, so it doesn't really even matter that much. I think it'll just be more fun if players kind of bunch it up a little bit, and we put more onus on some of the other parts of the game.
Interesting.
And that'll be a fun time. And then again, for the recreational player, bifurcation or not, I think we've already rolled back our own golf ball, so I just don't see it making much of a difference for recreational players. Like, you know, I could play a golf ball that goes 15 yards further. I could play a 7-iron that goes 25 yards further than my current 7-iron.
Right.
I've just made the determination it's not really good for my game.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are in that boat too. They prefer a golf ball that's soft and spinny to chip around the greens and putt on the greens, and not really worry too much about driver distance. And I'm not sure that 5 yards for somebody who's hitting it 250 or 260 really matters that much.
Interesting.
Or else we would all play top flights and max flies, and all those kind of distance-oriented golf balls.
Right. Very interesting. Well, you know, that's a good
but we'll see. I mean,
I like it.
No, we'll see.
It's good little pro rollback perspective. Well, listen, I can't wait to get back in the lab with you. A couple weeks, and we're getting our first session of 2024 in. Very, very excited. Also excited to see, you know, for you to get a snapshot of where kind of the work has evolved. You know, like just to see kind of, I feel like I've cleaned up so much from the stuff we've done, and so I'm really excited for you to see kind of the fruition of that. So can't wait to get back in the lab with you, brother. It's gonna be great.
Can't wait to tell you that everything is good and just go play.
I know. I can't wait either.
That's always my goal with players, is like, hey man, good enough right now. Like go do your thing now. Go learn how to score. Go learn how to play tournament golf, and which is a whole beast of its own.
Yep.
But at least you'll be armed with the tools and the confidence to know, hey, like the swing's not going to be the thing that holds me back.
Yeah.
And if something's holding me back, I can look elsewhere, and I know I'm good enough here. And that's always my goal, is that somebody who works predominantly with swings.
And I feel like for me, that's been my biggest hurdle to get to, is where I finally feel like the culmination of the work that you, me, and Max have all done. It's like, now I can say that and I know what I'm doing. And so that's really exciting. So thank you very much for that.
Exactly.
You are the man. Guys, check out Ryan. I've linked his Instagram and his website in the description of this podcast. So hit him up. If you are in the Lower Mainland, you are making a life bogey by not going to see Ryan. I'm telling you right now, if you play golf, it is a life bogey not going to check out Ryan and just get an assessment done to see where you are not being optimized. So, brother, thank you so much. I appreciate you and everything you do.
Thanks, man.
And guys, I will catch you on the next one.